foreign clothes. I had not had any made. We were planning to change into Manchu gowns before coming to the court, but we had received orders that Lao Tzu Tsung wished to see us in foreign clothes. I was very glad when I received that order, as there were several reasons why I wanted to wear Manchu gowns. First, the court ladies at the beginning treated us as outsiders. Secondly, I knew that Her Majesty did not like them, and besides, we were very uncomfortable living at the Palace in Peking, and made up our minds that we must wear Manchu clothes, which were made for it. We had so much work to do, and having to stand most of the time, one absolutely needed loose garments. Her Majesty ordered one of the eunuchs to bring one of her dresses for me to try on, so I went back to my own room and took off my wet clothes and changed. I tried on her gown, but it was too loose for me. The length was quite all right, and so were the sleeves. Her Majesty told one of the eunuch writers to write down my measurements in order to have a gown made for me, and said she was sure it would fit me. She did the same thing for my mother and sister, and ordered our gowns to be made at once. I knew she was pleased, as she told me what color would suit me the best. She said that I should always wear pink and pale blue, for they suited and were her favorite colors too. She also talked about our headdress, and ordered some made the same as worn by the other court ladies. She said to me, "I know you can wear my shoes, for I tried yours on the first day you came. Don't you remember? I must select a lucky day for you to become a Manchu once more." She said this with a smile, and no more foreign clothes after that. She took her special book for lucky days and hours, and studied it a little while. Then she said the 18th of that month was the best. Li Lien Ying, the head eunuch, knew how to please Her Majesty, and said he would give orders to have everything ready for us at that time. Her Majesty told us the way we must have our hair dressed, and what kind of flowers we should wear. In fact, she was very happy arranging to make us into Manchus. A short while after she dismissed us for the day. It rained for 3 days without stopping. The last day the Emperor came back, and all ceremonies ceased. Her Majesty never liked to stay in the Forbidden City, and I was not a bit surprised, as I hated the place. We had to use candles to dress by in the morning, as the rooms were in absolute darkness even in the middle of the afternoon. It rained so much that finally Her Majesty said she would return to the Summer Palace the next day, whether it was raining or not, and we were all very glad to go. We returned to the Summer Palace on the 7th. It was a dull day, but no rain. We packed everything in just the same way we had done when we came, and stopped at Wanshou and had our luncheon. That day we commenced to eat meat again. I noticed that Her Majesty enjoyed her meal very much. She asked me if I liked the food without meat, and I told her that everything was nicely done and that I enjoyed the food very much, although without meat. She told me that she could not eat that kind of food and enjoy it, and that if it were not necessary to make sacrifice she would have not abstained. The first garden party of the year was given by the Empress Dowager to the ladies of the Diplomatic Corps in the 4th moon. This year Her Majesty desired to deviate a little from previous custom, and issued orders that stalls should be arranged in the garden, on a similar principle to a bazaar, on which were to be displayed curios, embroidered work, flowers, etc., etc. These were to be given as presents to the guests. The guests were Mrs. Conger, wife of the American Minister; Mrs. Williams, wife of Chinese Secretary of the American Legation; Madame and Mademoiselle de Carcer, wife and daughter of the Spanish Minister; Madame Uchida, wife of the Japanese Minister, and a few ladies of the Japanese Legation; Madame Almeida, wife of the Portuguese Chargé d'Affaires; Madame Kahn, wife of the Secretary of the French Legation; the wives of several French officers; Lady Susan Townley, wife of the first Secretary of the British Legation; 2 ladies from the German legation, wives of German officers, and wives of a few customs officials. On this occasion Her Majesty selected a most beautiful gown of peacock blue, embroidered all over with phoenix. The embroidery was raised and each phoenix had a string of pearls 2 inches long sewed into its mouth. Whenever Her Majesty stirred, these strings of tiny pearls moved forwards and backwards, and it made a very pretty effect. Of course, she wore her jade phoenix on her hair, as usual, and shoes and handkerchief embroidered with the same pattern. My mother wore a lavender silk gown trimmed with silver braid. Her hat was of the same shade with plumes to match. My sister and myself wore pale blue Chinese silk gowns with insertion and medallions of Irish crochet and trimmed with tiny velvet bands. We wore blue hats with large pink roses. All the court ladies dressed in their most picturesque gowns, and it was a very pretty sight to see the procession walking to the audience hall. Her Majesty was in her happiest mood that morning, and said to us: "I wonder how I would look in foreign clothes. My waist is very small, but wearing this kind of loose gown it would not show. I don't think I would need to squeeze myself so tight either, but I don't think there is anything in the world prettier than our Manchu gowns." First, the guests were received in audience by their Majesties. They were accompanied by the Doyen, Baron Schikan, Minister for Austria, and an interpreter from each legation. On entering the audience hall, all the guests stood in line and the Doyen presented a short address to their Majesties. This was translated to Prince Ching, who in turn communicated it to the Emperor. The Emperor made a suitable reply in Chinese, which was translated by the Doyen's interpreter. Then the Doyen mounted the steps of the dais and shook hands with their Majesties, the rest of the guests being presented in turn. I was standing at the right hand of the Empress Dowager, and as each guest came forward, called out their names and the legation which they represented, Her Majesty had a few words with everyone, and when she saw a new face she would ask how long they had been in China, whether they liked it, etc., etc. All these conversations I interpreted for Her Majesty. As the guests finished paying their respects, they passed along and remained standing in the hall until everybody had been presented. The interpreters, who did not take part in this ceremony but had remained standing in the hall until it was over, were then conducted by Prince Ching to another part of the Palace, where refreshments were provided for them. After they had gone out, their Majesties descended from the dais and mixed with the guests. The formal ceremony now being concluded, chairs were brought in and everybody made themselves comfortable. Tea was brought in by the eunuchs, and after a few minutes' conversation, we all adjourned to the refreshment room, with the exception of the Empress Dowager, the Emperor, the Young Empress and the secondary wife. In the absence of Her Majesty, the Imperial Princess, the Princess Dowager's adopted daughter, officiated as hostess, Mrs. Conger sitting at her right and Madame de Carcer, wife of the Spanish Minister, on her left. The food was all Chinese, but knives and forks were provided for the use of the guests. During the luncheon, the Imperial Princess stood up and spoke a few words of welcome, which I translated into English and French. After the luncheon was over, we adjourned to the garden where their Majesties were awaiting us. A brass band was playing European airs. Her Majesty led the way around the gardens, passing the various stalls on the way, where the ladies would stop and admire the different articles, which were later presented to them as souvenirs of the occasion. On arriving at a tea house which had been erected in the gardens, everybody rested and partook of tea. Their Majesties then wished everybody good bye, and the guests were then conducted to their chairs and took their departure. As usual, we reported to Her Majesty everything that had taken place and how the guests had enjoyed themselves. She said: "How is it that these foreign ladies have such large feet? Their shoes are like boats, and the funny way they walk I cannot say I admire." I haven't yet seen one foreigner with